between 1847 and 1874. 97 souls vanished from a secluded settlement buried deep within the mountains of West Virginia. Not in a single calamity, but in a rhythm so deliberate it defied reason. Every disappearance came exactly 3 months apart, always on the night of the new moon. And always, without fail, a single leather shoe was left behind. The left shoe, its placement was eerily exact, set in the dead center of the missing person's bed, filled with mountain clay and pine needles. The clay was warm, as if pulled moments ago from the bowels of the earth. When federal agents finally reached Hollow Ridge in the bitter winter of 1874, they found 312 residents thriving lavish Boston clothes on their children, tables groaning under imported delicacies, and ledgers showing fortunes no mountain town could rightfully claim. Yet not one resident offered a single answer about the vanished. Each responded with the same phrase, in the same measured tone: "The mountain keeps its own accounts." What investigators uncovered in the abandoned copper mine beneath Hollow Ridge would be locked away for more than a century, hidden in government vault sacks as granted only with presidential approval. Even now, much of that report remains blacked out. Before we unravel the truth of Hollow Ridge, make sure you're subscribed and have that notification bell on. You won't want to miss any of our dives into America's darkest historical enigmas. And tell us in the comments, what city or state are you listening from? Our growing community of dark history enthusiasts fuels these investigations. But the story doesn't begin with the disappearances. It begins with the desperate birth of a settlement willing to do anything to survive the merciless isolation of the Appalachian wilderness in the years before the Civil War. Hollow Ridge lay in a valley so deep that even in summer, the sun touched it for barely 4 hours a day. Towering ridges loomed on every side, catching clouds that spilled into the valley like milk into a bowl, drowning it in mist for days. Founded in 1845 by 43 families fleeing the coal collapse of Pennsylvania, it was meant to be a fresh startup place where skill and grit could still forge prosperity. These were not criminals or outcasts. They were miners, craftsmen, engineers' families who had lost everything when the mines went silent and the banks closed their doors. At their head was Josiah Henley, a former mine foreman with 20 years underground and a nose for copper that, he swore, could detect the metal from a mile away. At 53, he moved like a man in his prime. Those who'd worked with him spoke of his uncanny reverence for the earth, how he would press his ear to the rock and insist he could hear the ore sing. Widowed in the cholera outbreak of 1832, he was left with 3 grown sons, all miners themselves. It was for them and the grandchildren arriving that he sought one final chance. Henley chose his followers carefully. The Cranstons of Philadelphia, masters of explosives. Cranston had blasted the first railroad tunnels through the Alleghenies. The Dietrichs, recent arrivals from Germany's Ruhr Valley. Experts in ore chemistry. Friedrich Dietrich had studied metallurgy at Heidelberg before fleeing political unrest. The McGreedys from Scotland, led by Thomas McGreedy, designed ventilation systems that could mean the difference between life and death underground, and the whose patriarch Reverend Paul Sutterfield saw in this migration a chance to found a God-fearing refuge. Untouched by city vice, Henley had courted each family in secret, in smoky boarding houses and church basements across Pittsburgh. He whispered of surveys, of rock samples, of a find so rich it could make them all wealthier than they'd dreamed. More than wealth, he promised freedom, a community beholden to no company, no bank. The valley had been revealed to him a year earlier by an old Cherokee guide named Joseph Stonecrow, met in a Wheeling tavern, half drunk, speaking in a mix of English and Cherokee. Stonecrow described a valley his people shunned, a place where rain turned the streams red and the earth seemed to breathe. Cherokee legends, recorded decades earlier, called it the place where the earth bleeds. They told of animals refusing to burrow there, and of lights gliding beneath the ground on moonless nights. Henley ignored the warnings. His secret surveys revealed copper of unparalleled purity. Veins plunging deeper than any mine in North America formed under geological conditions that shouldn't exist in the Appalachians. If word escaped, he knew powerful interests would swoop in. The journey to the valley took 3 brutal weeks. 2 wagons were lost to ravines. One family, the Pennywells, turned back after nearly losing a child in a swollen stream. Those who endured found themselves in a world apart, ringed by cliffs and forests so dense that midday was dim as dusk. By autumn of 1846, Hollow Ridge boasted nearly 200 residents. In just 18 months they had built a sawmill along Burden Creek, its waters running red each spring, painting the wheel a rusted crimson. They had a general store run by Marcus Finch, a meticulous record-keeper, whose ledgers would one day horrify investigators. A one-room schoolhouse taught by Mrs. Ellen Cranston, stocked with books from an anonymous Baltimore benefactor. At the center stood a white-steepled Methodist church, the only building to catch the first light of dawn. Reverend Sutterfield's sermons, once about providence, began to lean toward sacrifice and covenant. Though few recognized the change, they even had a postal route, though the mail came only once a month, carried by Daniel Moss, a Cherokee and Welshman, who braved the treacherous journey alone. Daniel Moss would later testify that Hollow Ridge never felt right. Eyes seemed to follow him everywhere. Residents huddled in hushed groups when he arrived, speaking only of copper shipments and trade, never of personal matters. Yet the prosperity of Hollow Ridge carried oddities no visitor could ignore. The settlement produced copper ingots of unmatched purity, 99.9%. According to Baltimore Assiers, but no outsider ever witnessed the smelting. Work began at midnight, ended before dawn, and miners came and went through a hidden entrance that guests were politely, but firmly, steered away from. The workers never spoke of their labor. Their families kept the same careful silence. The copper itself had remarkable traits. Telegraph companies paid exorbitant rates for Hollow Ridge wire, swearing it carried current with uncanny efficiency. Jewelers claimed it never tarnished, retaining a strange warmth in the hand. In 1847, Harvard scientist Dr. Edmund Whitlock visited to investigate, but, upon returning, he removed himself from academia altogether. Pages were missing from his notes. He never spoke of Hollow Ridge again. The first disappearance came on March 15, 1847. Exactly 18 months after the town's founding. It was the night of a new moon in the spring equinox. Margaret Dietrich, 19 years old and soon to be married to Robert Cranston, vanished between sunset and sunrise. Her bed was immaculate, untouched. The cabin's window stood open to the bitter cold. Ice coated the inside of the glass. Centered perfectly on her pillow sat her left shoe, filled with damp clay and pine needles. The scent was of deep breathing, earth mixed with something metallic, something almost alive. The shoe, though unmistakably hers, bore inexplicable wear, a sole nearly worn through, as if she had walked hundreds of miles in the 2 short months she had owned them. The leather was stained with mineral veins, branching like roots. When Anna Dietrich tried to empty the shoe, the clay came out as a hardened cast of Margaret's foot, down to every crease and line of her skin. The search that followed was relentless. For 3 days, families divided the forest into a strict grid, sweeping every shaft, cave, and frozen stream. Henley himself led parties up snowbound ridges, risking fatal falls. Dogs brought from neighboring settlements refused to track her, scent whining, tails tucked, backing away. Instead, the searchers found something worse. Near an ancient Cherokee marker, stone-etched with symbols older than the Cherokee, themselves lay 17 dead ravens in a perfect circle. Their bodies were still warm in the freezing air, necks twisted at identical angles, wings spread precisely alike. At the center was a single handprint in the frozen soil, a match to Margaret's own pressed impossibly deep. as though by something far stronger than human. Fresh axe marks scored nearby trees, forming a trail to the sealed mouth of the old working a mine shaft, predating even the Cherokee. The marks climbed the trunks, starting at the base and ending nearly 20 feet above the ground as though the one who made them had been walking upward into the air. The cuts themselves were unsettling to look at, angled in ways that defied sense, hinting at a meaning just out of reach. The second disappearance struck exactly 3 months later, June 15th, the summer solstice. William McGreedy, strong enough to carry 4 miles, vanished during his watch at the mine's entrance. His relief, Thomas Finch, found the post empty at midnight. On the stool sat William's left shoe, filled with the familiar warm clay and pine needles. His rifle leaned untouched against the wall, his pipe still smoked on the table. The mine door hung unlocked, its key buried in the clay inside the shoe. Inside, investigators found footprints in the dust, but they began 30 feet into the tunnel, as if William had simply appeared there. The trail led 100 feet deeper before ending abruptly at a solid wall of rock, as though he had walked straight into stone. By September, fear ruled Hollow Ridge. The third victim was 8-year-old Timothy Cranston. He vanished from a group of children playing in bright afternoon sunlight. There one moment, gone the next. His shoe appeared in the exact center of the locked church. Reverend Sutterfield alone possessed the key. This time, the clay inside held something new. Flecks of crystallized blood, glittering in the light. Families began barricading their homes, patrolling the streets with rifles loaded with church-blessed bullets. Mothers tied children to themselves with rope when leaving the house. A few tried to flee, but wagons broke, storms rose suddenly, and illnesses struck without warning. It was as if the valley itself refused to let them go. It was then that Josiah Henley called a meeting. The fog that night was so thick it swallowed lantern light, forcing people to walk hand in hand to the church. Inside, every remaining soul in Hollow Ridge gathered. Henley's words, survivors would later insist, were burned into memory. The cadence, the exact phrasing. We came here seeking fortune, and fortune demands sacrifice. The mountain gives us copper. Copper gives us wealth, and wealth demands payment. We all understood this when we signed the compact. We all agreed to the terms. The lottery is fair, the selection is random, and the obligation is absolute. We are not the first to make this bargain, and we will not be the last. The mountain has been feeding for longer than memory, and it will feed long after we are gone. For now, we are its servants. It is our provider. That's when Martha Sutterfield, the Reverend's wife, rose and asked the question that would haunt the survivors. What did you find in the old working, Josiah? What did you wake up? Henley's answer was to produce a cracked leather journal, its pages yellowed, the writing in a language predating every known indigenous script, and somehow impossibly everyone in that church could read it. The meaning bypassed language entirely, pouring straight into their minds. The journal spoke of a mining operation older than memory, perhaps centuries, perhaps millennia, had unearthed the same copper and struck the same terrible bargain. Within its brittle pages were precise instructions for the ritual of selection, the timetable of sacrifice, and a grim ledger tallying exactly 2,347 souls fed to the mountain before that. Civilization vanished, leaving only a sealed shaft and the warning stones the Cherokee had wisely obeyed. The history of the old working reached beyond written record into the haze where geology and myth intertwined. In 1891, ethnography James Mooney recorded Cherokee oral traditions describing a hole in the earth that predated migration, predated humanity itself. They had never mined it, never hunted within 5 miles. Medicine men performed annual sealing rite ceremonies that sometimes spanned weeks, requiring offerings of rare trade goods. They called it the breathing place, where the earth exhaled poison and inhaled sustenance. Their stories told of an age before time, when beings neither fully human nor entirely spirit, delved too deep, seeking something never meant to be found. Underground they built structures beyond understanding, rooms where up became down, tunnels folding in on themselves yet leading somewhere new, chambers larger within than the mountain's bulk could contain. In the Cherokee telling, those miners did not perish or leave, they became what they mined. Flesh to metal, bone to ore, blood to the red water that bled from the slopes each spring. On certain nights, they said, the sound of their work still rose through the rock, the ring of picks, striking stone from directions that did not exist in the human world. In 1561, Spanish explorers recorded something similar. Fragments in the archives at Seville describe Rodrigo de Guzman's discovery of vast pre-Columbian workings in the central Appalachians, perfectly round shafts, 3 feet across, descending beyond the reach of their ropes, walls smooth as if melted. One shaft led to a chamber filled with copper figures so lifelike the Spaniards mistook them for corpses. Each figure's face was turned upward, arms lifted in ecstasy or agony, impossible to tell which. When a soldier struck one statue to take a sample, it disintegrated into dust, and the man fell deathly ill, sweating a fluid that reeked of copper before dying within hours. The native guides refused to approach closer than 100 yards. They claimed the holes belonged to the Starwalkers, beings who came before and would come after, descending from the sky to harvest the earth's blood. These beings, the guide said, had not died but merged with their prize, becoming eternal, guardians over treasures that must never reach the surface. An elder named Speaks with Thunder told Gizman of lights moving, underground, intelligent in their pattern, but alien in their logic. When Henley's expedition reached the site in 1845, they found the ancient works partially collapsed, yet still open. The main shaft dropped 400 feet into solid rock before spilling into a labyrinth of caverns. The descent was perilous. The original ladders had rotted, leaving only corroded iron brackets, many inexplicably transformed into copper. Tools dropped from above fell for nearly 30 seconds before the echo of impact returned. In the deepest accessible chamber, they found something that should not exist. The walls were sheathed in a crystalline copper that could be peeled away in paper-thin sheets. It grew in branching patterns like veins or neural pathways, and within some nodules a faint light pulse, not quite phosphorescence, not mere reflection. When Henley touched the metal, he later claimed the sensation traveled through his bones, not his skin, bringing visions of places that could not be and times that had yet to come. Friedrich Dietrich, the settlement's chemist, conducted secret experiments in a hidden cellar lab. His notes, found decades later, sealed in wax, described properties that defied science. The copper maintained a constant temperature of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, no matter the surroundings. When remelted, it formed ingots of impossible weight, 3 times denser than copper should be. Placed in water, the metal made the liquid breathe, pulsing 20 times per minute, forming small whirlpools that alternated in direction. Multiple pieces synchronized with one another, creating currents so complex they seemed to communicate. Watching them for too long, Dietrich wrote, caused splitting headaches and dreams of being buried alive in, able to breathe, unable to die. Prosperity followed swiftly. By 1850, Hollow Ridge produced more refined copper than any 3 mines in the territory. Families lived in houses that would be considered mansions in Charleston. Children wore New York and Boston finery, ate Florida oranges in winter, studied from books printed in London. The town enjoyed luxuries unknown even to major cities, running water in every home, warmed by copper pipes that never cooled, gas lamps burning with an eerie blue-green flame that consumed no visible fuel. And yet, no outsider ever saw a miner come from the earth, dirty or exhausted. The night shift emerged at dawn, immaculate, their clothes unstained. When asked, they claimed the mine was well ventilated and unusually clean, but their eyes wandered. fixed on something far away that only they could see. In September 1851, federal surveyor Cornelius Vance arrived to map mineral claims for the newborn state of West Virginia. His official report spoke of a thriving, inexplicable community, but his private journal discovered in his granddaughter's attic in 1923 told a story that changed how the government understood Hollow Ridge forever. Vance's journal described staying in the home of the Cranston family, where he noticed an unsettling ritual. Each night, Mrs. Cranston set the table for 7, though only 4 family members ever sat down to eat. When he asked about the empty chairs, she replied simply, "They're working below." Her tone was flat, almost rehearsed, as if reciting a line from memory. Yet, when dinner ended, the untouched plates were cleared away, and Vance saw they bore crumbs, grease smears, and worn edges, though someone had eaten from them after all. On his 3rd night, unable to sleep for the low bone-deep humming that seemed to rise from beneath the earth, Vance slipped from the house and followed a group of men who left at midnight. They moved through the forest in perfect formation, no lanterns, no torches, yet walking with the certainty of men following a well-lit road only they could see. He trailed them to a clearing, where a small wooden shed masked the hidden entrance to the old working. One by one, 30 men descended into the shaft in utter silence, their motions synchronized like dancers keeping time to music no outsider could hear. Each carried only a small leather pouch around his neck. As they went down, Vance realized the humming was not a sound they made with their mouths, it came from their bodies. The vibration rattled his teeth, blurred his vision, and made his stomach turn. He tried to count them, but the number shifted in his mind, sometimes 30, sometimes 300, sometimes only 3. He hid in the underbrush until dawn, nausea and vertigo intensifying the longer he stayed near the entrance. When the first light hit the treetops, 28 men emerged in the same measured step, their pouches now heavy and their skin faintly gleaming, as if dusted with the thinnest layer of copper. The 2 missing men were not mentioned, not mourned, not even acknowledged. The next day, Vance cautiously asked Henley about the mine's operation. The foreman smiled without warmth. Vance said, "The mountain takes its share, Mr. Vance too. From 30 is a fair tax. Your government takes far more and gives far less in return. Would you like to see our operation? We could use a man of your qualifications." Vance left Hollow Ridge that same afternoon. His official report noted nothing unusual, but in his private journal, he wrote, "There is something unnatural in that place, something wearing the mask of prosperity, but reeking of decay. The copper is real enough. I've tested it, but the cost is not measured in coin. I fear what they've woken will not be sated with a few lives. It will grow. It will demand more. And God help us when it can no longer be fed." The vanishings continued like clockwork every 3 months, on the new moon. Always at night. Always a single shoe left behind, filled with warm clay and pine needles. Each shoe held something new. Strange mineral fragments unknown to science, crystallized organic matter unlike plant or animal tissue, or tiny metallic spheres that rolled toward the mine of their own accord. Victims came from all walks of life, young and old, men and women, newcomers and founders. But when investigators later studied settlement records, they uncovered a grim order, 1 person from each family, in rotation, before any family lost a second member. The pattern was too precise to be coincidence. Thomas McGreedy, whose son, William was the second to disappear, began keeping his own secret ledger, hidden in a hollow tree. His meticulous notes recorded each disappearance and the wealth that followed. Within days of every vanishing, copper production surged exactly 33%. New veins appeared in barren rock, or quality improved overnight. McGreedy also charted changes in the people themselves. Skin slowly took on a copper sheen, most visible in sunlight. Eyes developed a greenish reflective glow, catching light in the dark like a cat's. Children born after 1850 never cried, not at birth, not from pain. They only stared with those shining eyes, silent and patient. By 1858, his entries grew unhinged. He wrote of dreams, shared by the entire town, dreams of drifting through stone as though it were water, of breathing metal instead of air, of a vast intelligence living in the lattice of copper itself. He described waking to find his wife at the window, speaking a language that made his ears ache, while something in the mine answered in low harmonic tones that made the walls tremble. By 1865, with the Civil War over and federal authority reaching into the valleys again, Hollow Ridge's isolation was under threat. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad planned a spur through the region. Federal agents arrived to inventory resources for reconstruction. And then came Samuel Hartwell, a Baltimore Sun reporter, chasing rumors of a place where people vanished like smoke, where children were born silent, and miners worked without light or accident. Hartwell posed as a traveling merchant and stayed for 3 months. What he saw would send him to the Shepherd Pratt Asylum, where he would spend his final years sketching impossible underground geometries in obsessive detail. Hollow Ridge, Hartwell discovered, lived on 2 levels. The surface was that of any prosperous mining towns, social gatherings, Sunday services, schoolhouse recitations. But beneath was a hidden structure of ritual and sacrifice, something more akin to a religion. Though it worshipped no god of man, Hartwell attended what they called gratitude, gatherings held in the church on the eve of each new moon. They began like ordinary prayer meetings, Reverend Sutterfield reading from Scripture, leading hymns. But as midnight drew near, the service shifted. The words turned first to Latin, then to something older, words, older than human language itself. The congregation answered in perfect harmony, creating tones no human throat should be able to produce, sounds that seemed to rise from the walls, from the ground beneath, from the air itself. Sutterfield, once a Methodist minister preaching salvation and grace, now spoke of the covenant of the depths, the blessed transaction, and the willing gift. His Bible had been altered. Its new pages were sheets of beaten copper, so thin they were nearly transparent, the text shifting and changing depending on the angle from which they were read. Sutterfield now preached that God wore many faces, many names, and that the one worshipped in Hollow Ridge was older than the Christian God, older than any god spoken of by men, ancient as the metal in the earth itself. The congregation had even forged its own catechism, which Hartwell recorded, phonetically, as the words resisted being shaped by English letters. What do we owe? Everything we are, and will be. To whom do we owe it? To that which dwells in the deepness. How do we pay? With willing flesh and grateful souls. When will the debt be paid? When the last star burns cold, and the earth gives up its final secret. On December 15, 1865, Hartwell witnessed a selection ceremony that would haunt him until his dying day. Every soul in Hollow Ridge gathered in the church, infants in their mother's arms, the elderly leaning on neighbors for support. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing trying to get in. The church glowed with candlelight, but the candles were not made of wax. They burned with the valley's signature blue-green flame, releasing a smell Hartwell described as copper and corruption, metal and meat. A vessel was brought forward, ancient beyond reckoning, its surface etched with shifting symbols that twisted, the eyes if looked at directly, but seemed to writhe and crawl when glimpsed from the corner of one's vision. It passed hand to hand through the congregation. Each person dropped in a small personal token, a button, a coin, a lock of hair, a child's tooth. The objects made no sound as they fell, as though they were dropping into an infinite space within the vessel's shallow frame. Henley, now 60, but untouched by age's hair still black, his eyes glowing with that green reflection, reached into the vessel. His arms sank impossibly deep, up to the shoulder, though the container was scarcely a foot high. Minutes ticked by, though it felt like hours before he withdrew a single object. a brass button from the coat of Jacob Forrester, a newcomer of only 6 months, a widower from Ohio. Forrester rose without protest, tears streaming down his face as neighbors embraced him, whispering words Hartley could not hear but that made the man nod and smile through his grief. His twin 14-year-old sons were taken in by the Dietrich family, as tradition dictated. That night, Forrester walked alone to the old working. Hartley shadowed him through the fog, watching him move with the surety of a man who could see a path no one else could. At the mine, Forrester stripped off his clothes, folding them neatly on a bench built for that purpose, then donned a robe that looked like cloth but moved like liquid clinging to his skin in ways that seemed to defy gravity. Without hesitation, he descended into the shaft. Hartley waited until dawn. Forrester never returned. When Hartley crept to the entrance, he found the man's left shoe resting neatly where his clothes had been. The clothes were gone. Inside the shoe lay the familiar clay and pine needles and something else, a photograph of Forrester's late wife, transformed into thin beaten copper. Her image remained, but her eyes now followed the viewer with a sharp, unnatural awareness. That night, Hartley made another discovery. Beneath the church's cornerstone, buried in a strongbox, he found the original compact signed by every founding family. The parchment tore skin was human, treated with copper salts until it gleamed green and metallic. It was written in English, but spoke of concepts no earthly law recognized: those who dwell beneath, the hunger of the deep, and the price of extraction. The terms were precise. In exchange for limitless wealth, the community would provide willing vessels on a lunar schedule. The selection would be random but fair. If the chosen refused, the entire town would face retribution known only as the rising and the consumption. The signatures were inked in blood still damped to the touch after decades, smelling of iron and copper. Most chilling was an addendum in Henley's own hand, dated 1847. Having discovered the true nature of the bargain and finding no escape from its terms, we hereby accept our role as shepherds of the feeding. We understand that our prosperity is built on consumption, that our wealth flows from sacrifice, and that our children and our children's children shall inherit both the blessing and the curse. We pray that God, if He still watches this forsaken place, will forgive us for what we have become and what we must continue to be. Hartley also uncovered the records of those who tried to break the pact. In 1853, the Washburn family fled under cover of night. At dawn, their wagon was found at the edge of town, the family inside, transfigured into perfect copper statues. The statues were melted down, their metal forged into jewelry worn by the survivors as a warning. In 1859, Robert Cranston once engaged to Margaret Dietrich. The first two vanish led a group of young men to seal the mine with explosives. The blast left the entrance untouched, but by morning, every conspirator had aged 50 years overnight. Hair white, skin wrinkled, bones fragile, they died within days, whispering to anyone who would listen, "The mine is not a hole, it is a mouth, and it has teeth that reach the whole valley." Everything came to a head on March 15, 1874, exactly 27 years after the first disappearance. The number itself was an omen, 3 times 3 times 3, sacred in the mine's strange mathematics, cursed in Cherokee lore, and etched again and again in the pre-Columbian symbols deep below. The town had dreaded this date, preparing for it in tense silence. That night's selection fell on Mary Henley Josiah's 16-year-old granddaughter. She was beloved teacher of the youngest children, caretaker of the elderly, her voice able to make even the strange new hymns sound beautiful. She was engaged to Edwin Garrett, the schoolteacher's son, a boy who had never seen life beyond the valley. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, the chosen refused. Mary barricaded herself inside her family's home, blocking doors and windows. She had long suspected her turn would come. The cycle was predictable to anyone who dared count. Hidden throughout the house, She left letters. In them, she wrote, "I have seen what becomes of those who go below. They do not die. Death would be merciful. They become part of something that should not exist. Consciousness trapped in metal. Souls dissolved into copper, aware forever. I will not go. Let the compact be broken. Let whatever comes, come. Better to die as human than live as what we are becoming. By dawn, the entire settlement had gathered outside the Henley home. They pleaded with her for hours. Parents pressed their children to the windows, begging Mary to think of their future. The elders spoke of the prosperity the compact had brought, the lives it had sustained, the community it had built. And then Josiah himself, her grandfather, knelt in the cold mud, rainwater soaking his clothes, his palms flat against the door as he spoke to her in that ancient tongue older than words. As the invisible new moon reached its zenith, the earth responded to the broken bargain. The ground beneath Hollow Ridge began to move, not with the violent tremor of an earthquake, but with a slow, rhythmic motion, breathing, a colossal chest rising and falling. Each inhalation and exhalation took minutes to complete, too deep, too alien to belong to anything human. With each exhale, a warm wind drifted up from fresh cracks in the ground, carrying the scent of copper and something alive, but not in any way biology could explain. Burden Creek began to run uphill, its waters reversing course toward the old working. As it flowed backward, the clear mountain water turned a vivid, wet crimson, not mineral stain, but the color of fresh blood. Fish swam against themselves, eyes gleaming with that green reflection, infecting Hollow Ridge. Birds fell from the sky, dead, but changed. Their feathers had become fine copper wire, their wings still beating in vain. From the shaft of the old working came a sound no survivor could describe without faltering. It was not screaming, not singing, but both, tangled together. The voices of the 93 taken over the years, still present, still aware. Some listeners swore they could pick out individuals. Margaret Dietrich, humming her sewing lullaby. William McGreedy, calling for his father. Little Timothy Cranston endlessly reciting his arithmetic tables. Henley made his choice, more than anyone. He knew what dwelt below, what they had fed for 27 years. If the feeding stopped, it would not simply take Hollow Ridge, it would follow the copper veins that ran under the Appalachians, under the continent, perhaps farther still. The hunger would spread like an infection through a body, racing along the metal's lattice. With the three remaining founders, Friedrich Dietrich, still strong at 73, Thomas McGreedy, keeper of the record, and Reverend Sutterfield, who had twisted their faith to fit their damnation. Henley descended into the mine one final time. They carried the tools prepared for this day, ropes braided from 27 years' worth of human hair, hardened with copper salts, lanterns burning the blue-green flame that lit spaces no other light could touch, and the original copper vessel, now filled with personal belongings from all 93 taken preserved for this moment. Only one man witnessed what happened next, Samuel Hartwell, who had hidden himself in the mine's upper galleries days before. His account, written with a trembling hand on notebook pages stained with copper-colored tears, defied the boundaries of the possible while remaining anchored in the intraphysical world. The four old men descended past the known copper formations, past the mapped galleries where miners toiled, into regions that could not be mapped. Their shapes and angles shifted depending on who looked and when. They descended for what felt like hours, though Hartley's pocket watch claimed only minutes. Time, like space, lost meaning in the deep earth. They entered a chamber Hartley could scarcely describe, not because it was beyond description, but because its reality demanded admitting human understanding of space was incomplete. The room was vast and close at once, its walls miles away yet within reach. It glowed with phosphorescent minerals whose light cast upward shadows and illuminated things that were not there, while leaving visible objects dark. And in the center, they found the true source of Hollow Ridge's wealth and its curse. It was no beast, no demon, but something far worse. The remains of an earlier human civilization that had found this copper and made the same bargain. Hundreds of bodies clung to the walls, perfectly preserved by the cave's mineral air. Each corpse stood at the end of a copper vein, the metal spearing through their bodies like roots through earth. They were not dead. The copper's strange warmth, its breathing water patterns, its impossible density, all of it made sense now. The metal was using them, keeping them alive in a state between life and death. Their minds intact, their bodies transformed into living ore. Their nervous systems were copper wiring, carrying not electricity, but something older, some form of consciousness predating humanity's first thought. The 93 from Hollow Ridge were there too, in varying stages of transformation. Margaret Dietrich's face was still hers, though copper veins traced her skin like wood grain. Her hair had become metallic strands, her eyes aware, watching Henley as he approached. She moved just enough to prove she recognized him. At the chamber's heart was no entity, no god, just a process, a universal mechanism humans were never meant to touch. Copper was not merely metal, it was a medium, a vessel for preserving and transmitting consciousness across geological time. The first civilization had sought immortality through it, feeding themselves into the system willingly. Instead, they found something worse than death. Endless awareness without will, existence without end. 3 days later, federal investigators arrived, drawn by telegraphs reporting earthquakes. Yet no quake had registered beyond the valley. Hollow Ridge was chaos. The old working had collapsed, but not like any collapse geologists knew. The rock had flowed, sealing the shaft as a throat swallows, then hardened in patterns like muscle fiber. The stone itself was alien to the area, absent from any geological survey. Henley, Dietrich, McCready, and Sutterfield were gone, no bodies were ever recovered. Mary Henley lived, but she was not the same. Overnight, her hair had turned white, her eyes losing that green glow and settling into a flat gray like mountain stone. She spoke only in whispers that made those who heard them wince in pain. To every question, she gave the same cryptic reply. They chose to hold the door closed. Pray it stays that way. The most disturbing aftermath was not Mary, but the 93, who had been taken over the years now, found wandering the forests in various states of shock and madness. They had no idea how they'd come to be there. The last thing each remembered was going to sleep, sometimes years, even decades ago, in towns scattered across the Appalachians. People long presumed dead. Medical examination revealed their bodies carried impossible scars, patterns like copper veins beneath the skin. Their hair was bone white. They whispered of dreams where they were buried alive, yet of every grain of earth, every drop of water moving through the ground. Some tried desperately to return to the collapsed mine, claiming they had left something important below, though none could say what the government's official report classified until 1974 under the National Security Act. The disaster to illegal mining practices causing mercury and copper poisoning, resulting in hallucinations and mass psychosis. The valley was evacuated, condemned, and closed to all development under the guise of geological instability. No mention was made of 93. People returned from the dead. They were listed simply as displaced persons found during evacuation, but Hartley's hidden journal, discovered decades later in the wall of his asylum cell, told a very different story. In his final lucid pages, he wrote of a last bargain struck in the depths. Henley and the 3 remaining founders had offered themselves not as fuel, but as locks. They would let the copper grow through them, while their wills were still their own, becoming living seals to hold back the thing below. The collapse, Hartley insisted, was no accident. It was triggered deliberately with explosives hidden over years, set to close the old working forever. But the true seal was not rock, it was them. The 93 freed were scattered across the country by federal authorities, kept apart to prevent any gathering. Most died within 5 years, their bodies unable to live away from Hollow Ridge's mineral saturation. Before they died, many dreamed the same dream, standing in a vast underground chamber, watching for old men turn to copper, their faces frozen in unyielding resolve, their bodies branching like roots into the stone, holding shut a door that must never be opened. Mary Henley vanished from custody soon after. Rumors placed her in Cherokee communities in North Carolina, teaching children the dangers of disturbing the deep places and the importance of keeping certain doors closed forever. She carried with her a copper vessel ancient, covered in shifting symbols that she claimed contained the final contracts of those who had learned too late that some knowledge comes with a price that can never be paid in full. The land where Hollow Ridge once stood is now a federal wilderness, sealed off under severe penalty. Officially, the ban is due to geological instability and contamination. Unofficially, nothing grows in a perfect 5-meter circle where the settlement once lay the soil, neither alive nor dead, but waiting. Water samples from the area still carry impossible copper levels. Copper that remains at exactly 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Copper that makes water breathe every 3 months. On the new moon, seismic monitors around the site record vibrations from deep underground. The pattern is always the same, the rhythm of breathing slow, patient. The strongest pulses come on March 15th, June 15th, September 15th, and December 15th. The old sacrifice dates as if something below still expects to be fed. Over the years, attempts to investigate have all ended in failure or tragedy. In 1889, a Smithsonian team drilled 30 feet into the collapse before striking a vein of copper liquid at room temperature that flowed upward against gravity. It was mixed with something organic, as though metal and flesh had fused at the molecular level. The team sealed their borehole with molten lead, one of the few materials Henley had noted as hostile to the copper's growth, and fled. Local hunters through the late 1800s often found left shoes in the surrounding forest. Always the left, always filled with warm clay and pine needles, sometimes holding small personal items untouched by time. By 1900, exactly 97, such shoes had been documented, one for each who had vanished. Early perimeter guards had their own tales. On certain new moon nights, they claimed to hear something from beneath, not sound exactly, but vibrations that formed words in their minds. 97 distinct tones, speaking as one, offering unimaginable wealth to anyone willing to break the seal. Tools left near the boundary were found closer to the center come morning. Compasses spun wildly within a mile, always settling not north, but straight down. Most chilling was a letter found among President Ulysses S. Grant's private papers after his death, dated 1874. The situation in West Virginia has been contained, but at terrible cost. We must ensure that no one ever attempts to reopen that mine. The 4 who sacrificed themselves to seal it understood what I cannot put in official records, that some hungers, once awakened, can never be satisfied, only contained. Their vigil must never be disturbed. Zosha map accompanied it, copper deposits stretching across the continent. Hollow Ridge at the center, with red X's marking other sealed sites. Hartley's last journal entry, written days before his death in 1876, was lucid and final. We tell ourselves the earth is dead, stone from which we extract dead wealth. But the earth is alive in ways we cannot understand, and in some places, it is hungry. The 97 souls who fed that hunger are not gone, but trapped. And the 4 who chose to become eternal seals, they are all that stand between that hunger and the world above. God help us if their vigil fails. Mary Henley's trail fades in official records, but stories of her persisted, moving from town to town, warning miners of copper to pure water that breathes, veins that stay warm. Always with her, the copper vessel, said to contain the last testament of the desperate and the damned. In 1891, The newly formed U.S. Geological Survey officially designated Hollow Ridge a permanent exclusion zone. Access remains forbidden to this day. The official records hide the details, and the folklore around the valley is fractured. Some say plague, others collapse, still others whisper of bargains with the deep. All agree on one thing: the mountain remembers, and it waits.